Hi, I'm Daniel Fisher here at Sweetwater Sound. Today I'm very excited to show you the new Hydrasynth digital wave morphing synthesizer. This is by a brand new company called ASM, that stands for Ashen Sound Machines. Now on this video I'm going to do a deep dive through as many parameters as I can and get as deep as I can into them. So if you were really hoping to listen to a bunch of sounds, I already made that video this morning. So just find the other Hydrasynth video that we made and you can listen to all the pretty sounds. I'll also be making sounds on this as well, but it'll be specifically to show off each of the features of the parameters. So here we go. The new Hydrasynth is a digital synth based on wave morphing, which means that you can choose a whole bunch of different waves and sweep between them. You can choose 8 of them and morph between them. There's also mutation that you can do via FM and pulse width and wave stacking and other tricks like that. There are multiple filters simultaneously in parallel or serial. There are 5 envelopes. There are 5 LFOs plus a 6th LFO just for mod wheel vibrato. There are 4 effects, 2 that you can choose what they are, plus a delay and a reverb. They're all great. It is 8 notes of polyphony. It is 3 oscillators. It also has ring modulation as its own source and noise as its own source that can be white or pink or brown. It has an amazingly powerful arpeggiator, and one of the most exciting things about this keyboard is that it has polyphonic aftertouch, and it works really well. It's possibly, no, I'm certain, it is the most musical polyphonic aftertouch I've ever used because of a bunch of parameters that you can choose for it. It also has a full-length ribbon that works really well, that can not only do the things you would expect, you know, pitch and filter and things like that, but it can also do this thing called theremin mode. Very exciting. Even down to the controllers. I really like the mod wheel and the pitch wheel. They're kind of shaped like wheels, but they're actually paddles, and you get the best of both worlds. Love that. And then, for those who are into Eurorack and other control voltage things, this thing has both control voltages ins and outs. The inputs are 2 separate mod sources that can be used in a mod matrix, which we're going to go into in great detail. And the other knobs on the front panel that make this a great performance synthesizer. You have real-time control of cutoff, resonance, drive, morph, envelope 1, LFO 1 to either filter 1 or filter 2, and you can switch between them. There are 8 knobs dedicated to the arpeggiator as well as 4 buttons. There's a chord mode. And for listening to it, you have left and right audio out. It has 2 headphone jacks, an 1/8 inch and a 1/4 inch, so whichever one you have, and both of them can be used at the same time. They have their own dedicated volume, which means that you can work on your synthesis without the sound going to the audience and then bring that in. Everything about this machine is really well thought out, really well programmed. We're also going to go into the desktop unit. I haven't had it as long, so I don't know it as well. But the important thing is that the engine is identical for both, and it's really just some physical hardware differences. Obviously, the keys and the ribbons, and only a couple of the knobs different, but everything else is identical on that. So now let's start digging. So the first thing I'm going to do to show you this from scratch is to initialize it, and I call that INIT. And as I always say, always start from an INIT when you make your programs, because if you start from someone else's patches, there's going to be all these connections that will bite you in the end when you're trying to do something and all of a sudden you don't understand why something doesn't work. It's just best to start from an INIT. And the Hydrasynth gives you an INIT button. You just hit it once. It says, would you like to initialize this patch? And it's not as dangerous as that sound. It doesn't really initialize the patch. It initializes the edit buffer. So until you save, you haven't done anything to the patch that's underneath it. So you hit it one more time. And now I get a very plain sawtooth wave, and it's a very nice sawtooth wave. And that's with filter wide open, envelopes completely flat, no effects. So first I will show you the oscillator section. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit oscillator 1. And now these 8 knobs have to do with things on the oscillator page. And one of the things that makes editing this so much fun is that when you go to a page, regardless of what you're doing, the parameters all have their own dedicated knob. There's no cursor, use the knob, cursor, and use the knob. It's like every knob, you can be turning multiple knobs at the same time, which is something that you have to go back to real-time synthesizers with full panel knobs to get that kind of fluidity of being able to move multiple knobs. So I'm on Oscillator 1 page, and on page 1 of that, it shows that I'm in single mode. What that means is I can just pick a single wave shape. There are so many wave shapes, I actually don't know the number, but I will scroll through some of them until I get tired of scrolling. Because I'm in single, I can now choose my wave, and I'll start with a sine. You can see the wave shape on the OLED screen. It's a gorgeous screen, not only for showing you parameter changes like envelopes, filter shapes, and wave shapes, but when you're actually playing, you actually get to see the audio as an oscilloscope. At first you might think it's a gimmick, but as you're sitting moving parameters and watching it move, it really helps you understand hearing what you're doing because you're seeing what you're doing as well. It makes for a very nice connection. So we'll first start with the geometric waves like you'd find in a typical analog synthesizer. And we'll start with sine wave, triangle, and one called triangle saw, which I really like. I use this one a lot. Saw, square, and pulse, and various degrees of pulse. But then it starts again to wave shape where they just had to come up with names for these things. And there are so many of them, I'll scroll for a little while until we get tired and then I'll stop. Enough of that, but it goes for a long time. And when you've chosen your wave, you can now, I'll go back to my triangle saw. You can do semitones up to 36, so 3 octaves. Up to 3 octaves down, and then when you go way down, I mean, that's a pulse every second or so. So really powerful on that. And then you can also move in cents. So 50 cents. And it has key tracking right here. So you can do weird tunings if you want. You can do hyper tunings where you're actually exceeding. And you can set it to 0, so that will let you make an oscillator be a drone and be on any note you want. So that's single mode, where you get to choose a single waveform for that oscillator, of which there are 3. Now I'm going to go to WaveScan mode, and basically what WaveScan does is it lets you pick any 8 wave shapes from that very, very long list, and then you can sweep through that. And you can sweep through that with an LFO or an envelope or a ribbon or aftertouch or mod wheel or some external controller via CV. I mean, it pretty much any controller can be assigned to it. The way you get to it is you set this from single to WaveScan, and then you hit the wave list edit, and you can see now that there are 8 slots. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to randomly dial in a different wave shape for each of these, just so you can hear that there are differences. And silence can be one of the wave shape choices, so you can also kind of get a rhythmic thing going. All right, so hopefully that's enough difference. And I'm going to go back to the WaveScan page. And now as I turn this knob, you're going to hear me morph between those 8 waves. But instead of just being able to go through the 8, if you wanted to sweep through all of the wave shapes, you just simply go back to single. And in a mod matrix, instead of sweeping, we'll go back and make the ribbon the sweeping thing again. And instead of WaveScan, I'm going to choose something called Wave. Now, I'm going to actually run through all of the possible wave shapes just with the ribbon. Just a really clever way of doing things. So that, and the idea again is that you can morph between 8 where you're actually morphing from one shape to another, or you're just hard banging through all of the possible wave shapes. Both have very useful features. It's awesome that you have both of those. So that's Oscillator 1, and that can go into 2 processors called Mutant 1 and Mutant 2. And they could be a whole list of things. The first is FM, and it's real FM. It's very musical. You can do DX7 kind of things, but you can also do lots of experimental things. Right now, I'm choosing as my source a sine wave, and I'm going to go back and I've set Oscillator 1's wave shape to sine wave. So I have a sine wave modulating a sine wave, very traditional FM. And I'll turn to wet dry. That's another thing. You can do wet dry. So you do FM, but maybe not 100% of it. Maybe you're hearing 50% of the dry. So you get to do lots of hybrid sounds that were not possible before. And so I'm going to go to 100%. Now as I move the depth of the sine wave modulating the sine wave, you're going to hear the standard FM kind of sounds. And if that's not giving you enough depth, they have feedback, which takes the output of that and runs it back into itself, so it gets even crazier. Lots of new sound shaping there. And right now I'm using a ratio of 1:1. In other words, the frequency that's modulating the other frequency is the same exact frequency. But I can do ratios of frequency. If I do whole steps, which you do by holding the shift knob, which is pretty typical for an FM keyboard, but you can also do ratios that are not whole numbers. And you can go below 1.0 for kind of a sub ratio. So that's just one of the mutant choices. The next one is wave stack, and I really like this one a lot. I'm going to go back to a sawtooth wave so you have something you recognize. And I'm going to set the wet dry to 100%, but the depth at 0. And what this does is it simulates having one or more of the same exact wave stacked on top of itself but slightly detuned. And you could keep stacking more and more and more and more. The beauty is you're getting all this thickness, this ensemble, this lushness. Doesn't cost you any more polyphony, doesn't cost you any more oscillators. We're still only on Oscillator 1. Remember, we still have 2 more oscillators left and a ring mod and noise as well. All right, so to make this easier, I've connected a sustain pedal. One of the things I really like is that all of the jacks and connectors are listed up here on dark black over black metallic. And so you don't see them till you really need them. You just sort of lean in a little bit and you could see all of them without all that extra wording on the top. Very nice touch. I'm now going to hold a chord. And then I'm going to slowly increase the depth of wave stacking. The next mutant mode is Oscillator Sync, and it works very much like you would expect Oscillator Sync to work. lots of really interesting differences. So one, you could change the ratio. You can also add feedback. Like brand new sounds to use. And they have this thing called window, and I don't completely understand it, but it basically sounds like you're sonically focusing on different parts of the frequency ranges. So at some point it seems like you're rolling off the bottom end. The easiest way to do it is to just sweep it for you. Again, just more to play with. And you can have oscillators 1, 2, or 3 be the source that you're syncing against that oscillator. So you could really have multiple oscillators syncing each other in different ways. So crazy powerful. All right, so the next one after that is pulse width. And it's pretty much a standard original pulse width type. So I'm going to just go to square. And as I sweep that, and you can choose pulse width shapes from your oscillator mode, but you can also take any wave shape and not just square. So now I'm going to go to saw, and I'm going to do the same pulse width thing to it. So again, just more stuff to play with. You can change the ratio. And then there's feedback to make it even more extreme. And then there are other pulse width modes. There's one called squeeze. And then there's another one called pulse width ASM that lets you pick 8 different levels of warping. So again, just lots to explore. And the last one is called harmonic, and it basically seems to focus on the various harmonics in the wave and make them stand out. So I'm going to start here with a sawtooth wave and sweep through that. So basically it's the harmonic series, and you're emphasizing those as you go through. And all of these modes, from FM linear to wave stack to oscillator sync to pulse width squeeze to pulse width ASM and harmonic, are available on Mutant 1 and 2 for Oscillator 1, and Oscillator 2 gets Mutants 3 and 4. So you got 4 of these all working on the first 2 oscillators. And then your third oscillator, again, is a full-blown oscillator in that it can do any transposition, 36 steps up or down. It can be any wave shape. It can have its own detuning. It can have its own key tracking. So it is a full-blown oscillator. It just doesn't have the mutants. And the last one is you have choices of ring modulation and noise. So if I go and turn the ring mod volume up, I'm gonna turn off all the other oscillators, turn up ring mod. And now depending on what my sources are, oscillator 1, oscillator 2, oscillator 3, and as I change frequencies of those, you'll hear radically different ring modulation. And then the last thing is noise. So I'm going to turn off the ring mod. I'll turn up noise. That's just standard noise, but you got white and pink and brown. So really good for your hi-hats, really good for various percussion, snares and things like that, and really good for kick and other effects. Now it all comes to the mixer, and I'll just turn some volumes up and I'll change some octaves. All right, so I really like the mixer. A couple things are fantastic. One of them is if you hit solo, you can hear any one oscillator. And then when you let go, you hear them all. So it's just a great way to go editing things in the oscillator section and being able to hear only what you're working on, which is very nice. In the mixer, your first page, and I should say something about pages. If there are multiple pages, there are two ways you can get through the pages. You can either keep hitting the button that you hit to get to that section, or you can use the page up, page down arrows. Either way works the same. So that's page 1, where you have the volumes of all 5 of your sources and the ability to solo. On the second page, you have panning, and this is crucial. Very rarely do you get to pan each of the oscillators that are going to the same filter. Usually panning is done after the filter in your amp section. So this is very, very powerful. What that tells you is that both of the filters are true stereo. We'll get to the filters in a second. But that means I can pan. So I'm going to go ahead and solo oscillator 1. And then I'm going to go to the panning page. So I could pan oscillator 1 hard left and pan oscillator 2 hard right. We'll get those both in the same area, but I'll detune one of them. So now I have left and right. I'm going to turn the noise off and turn the ring off. And if I detune, you start getting a really satisfying stereo image. And not only can you pan in the stereo field, there's yet another page that lets you pan per filter. So the filters can either be set up in serial or parallel. And that's done here in the filter page. You got a series and parallel switch. And if you go in parallel, I'll go ahead and make this a high pass filter, and I'll make the first one a low pass filter, and then I'll solo oscillator 1. And I'm going to pan it back to the center. But now listen as I pan into the first filter and into the second filter. So now I'm only in the low pass. Now I'm only in the high pass, and then some blend in between. But I can do that per source. So oscillator 1, 2, 3, and noise, and ring mod all have their own filter panning as well as their stereo panning. So now we're going to go to the filters. And as I said, there are 2 filters that can be either in serial or parallel, as shown on the little diagram here. And the first filter has a bunch of different filter types. I like all of them, I really do. The first 2, these are low pass ladder filters, both 12 dB per octave cutoff and 24 dB, so basically a 2-pole and a 4-pole. Then you've got the fat version of the ladder, which just has this mid-range boost that I really like, and I'm going to sweep through these, but I just want to talk about them quickly. So that's both a 2-pole and 4-pole. Then there's a low pass gate, kind of like you might find in a modular system. There is the famous MS-20 filter, both low pass and high pass. And then there's a low pass, band pass, high pass of a famous modular synthesizer. Then finally there's a vowel filter that lets you control various parameters of speech type sounds. Basically it's 2 filters doing various things, but it creates all different vowel types. Very cool. And the second filter is a morphing filter, and I really like it. It basically gives you the ability to smoothly sweep between low pass, band pass, and high pass, as well as changing the cutoff and resonance and key tracking and envelope amount and LFO amount and velocity response. I'm going to play through all of these, but I just wanted to talk about them really quickly. All right, so back on filter 1, the ladder filters. I really, really like them. My test for a filter is always to take a low sawtooth wave and run it into a resonant low-pass ladder filter and sweep it. And if it does what I like, almost always I like that filter for all kinds of things. It's like a really good test of a filter. So to test that, I made a patch called Ribbon Trippin', and basically I'm sweeping that resonant low pass filter over a low sawtooth wave into a ping pong delay. And I gotta say, I really, really like this. Like that filter. So now let's go through the different filter types. I'm going to just do a quick INIT, and I'm going to filter 1. I'm currently set up at a low pass ladder filter, 2-pole. The resonance is at 0, the cutoff's all the way up. So play a note. Notice that it's really smooth, and I'm not even moving in the shift mode to give me fine mode. So you can really hear we're not stepping. It's very, very clean. And although I can get to it from here, again, it's important to know that I can also get to it from the knob that's always dedicated to cutoff. And to do one is to do the other, so they work together. And there's a lot of that in this machine where they've put the same parameter in multiple places wherever it's easiest to get to at that moment, but they all interact and create the same value. So now I'm going to do with resonance. And as you can hear, it goes into full oscillation, and it just does it in a way that I really, really like. That was the 12 dB per octave. Now here's the 24. And with resonance. And self-oscillating. That's the part I like. Listen how it interacts with each note. It doesn't just sound like you're sweeping a sine wave. You're really hearing that resonant peak hit each of the harmonics. Then we got a fat. To my ears, it's just a mid-range bump that I really like. I tend to go to these two filters, both the ladder filter and the fats first. I'm just a ladder filter guy, but they're all really good sounding. So here's the fat 12. And with resonance. And with lots of resonance. Same thing with 24 dB per octave for the 4-pole. And with some resonance. And with a lot of resonance. And notice that while I'm sweeping these, there's no staircasing of the filter cutoff, and there's no glitchiness. It just sounds beautiful all the time, and that's just really important. So the next one is a low-pass gate. And with some resonance. More. And fully. Beautiful. Next one, the MS-20, right? So, for your acid bass lines, things like that, it's a great sound. Here it is with no resonance. some resonance. And a lot of resonance. And self-oscillating. And then the high pass from the MS-20, one of the great parts of an MS-20. I'm going to do it with no resonance. Some resonance. And more. And unless you do that chord trick of using resonance on a high pass, but the cutoff being low so that you're giving a really deep bass boost, even though it's a high pass filter. Right there. And then this low pass filter, and this is from a famous boutique modular. And we'll start with no resonance. And again, some of these things seem subtle, but it's really nice to have all those choices. And there have been times when each of the filter types has been the exact right one I needed. Here's some more resonance. And a lot more resonance. And full on. Then a band pass from the same boutique modular. Some resonance. A lot of resonance. Ow. Full on. And really, I could be turning that now much, much slower to show you all of the interaction that's going on. It would take me forever. But you can hear it, like it really wants to live in different places of that harmonic series. And high pass of the same thing, resonance all the way down. And again with resonance. And a lot of resonance. And fully resonant. Beautiful. The last one is the vowel filter, and you have control and cutoff and resonance. And between the three of them, you can get lots of different vowel shapes, and you got a cute little mouth thing over here. All of those could be controlled from anything like an LFO or an envelope or polyphonic aftertouch or the ribbon or the wheels or other external controls. So that is finally the first filter, okay? A second filter, I'm going to go back to INIT just so we can start fresh. And I'm going to filter 2. And like I said, this is a morphing filter. And by that, I mean that it can be a low pass, a band pass, or a high pass, and everything in between while you're also able to control the cutoff. Again, a lot more options while you're blending each of the oscillators, some to filter 1, some to filter 2, different percentages of those, and then each of them sweeping in their own ways. And remember that all of these knobs on the top can control either filter 1 or filter 2, depending on which one is lit. We'll start with low pass. I'm going to turn the cutoff all the way down so you don't hear anything. And we'll start all the way to the left here and start sweeping the cutoff. And now I'm going to put it somewhere in the middle and start sweeping the type between low pass, band pass, and high pass. And again, it's very interactive with cutoff. And again, that filter can also respond directly from envelope 1, LFO 1, velocity, key tracking, or anything via the matrix mod. All right, so that's the filters. The last standard synth part is the amp. It's very simple. It only has one page. You have a volume level, velocity response, and you can send LFO2 directly to it. And you can see that in the diagrams. LFO2 is going directly to the amp. Envelope 2 is going directly to the amp. Envelope 1 is going to filters 1 and 2, and LFO 1 are going to filters 1 and 2. You could turn those off. You can reassign them via somewhere else. Just very, very powerful. So the last part of the audio path are the 4 effects. They are in series. They can all be stereo. And to show you that, I'm going to init one more time. And the very first effect, called pre-effects, can have a bunch of choices. Right now it's on bypass, but I can set it to chorus. There are 3 different types of choruses. Then you can choose your rate and your depth and your offset and your feedback, whether it's in mono or stereo, and it's wet dry. And it's a really beautiful chorus too. So here it is dry. And it can go really slow. I can go down to 0.02 hertz because I really like a chorus where you don't hear the periodic sweeping back and forth. It's just sort of an effect that's there. But I can go very fast as well. And since the rate and the depth are settable via the mod matrix, I could have anything sweep those, whether it's, again, aftertouch or the ribbon or the mod wheel or blah, blah, blah. So that's the chorus. There are 3 of those. They're just slightly different flavors. They're all very nice. Here's flanger. Has both positive and negative feedback. You can set your offset, so you can choose where in the area it's sweeping, and you can choose your depth. For the chorus and the flange and the phaser, I really like that you can choose the effect area and then how wide it is in that area. So you can really find the sweet spot for any of those, for the chorus or the flange or the phase, just for that sound. Find the sweet spot and only sweep between that. So going on to the next one, rotary. I could choose a low speed and a high speed. And then I have a low depth and a high depth, so I can change how much amplitude and frequency modulation is going on. I also have a low-high balance, so I can change how much you're hearing of the tweeter, how much you're hearing of the woofer. And it has a wet-dry, so I can blend part of the original dry signal with the rotary. Very, very cool. And then via, again, mod matrix, I could assign anything to change the speed of that Leslie, whether it's a foot switch in the mod wheel or aftertouch. Blah, blah, blah. So the next one is phaser. Again, I really like this phaser. Not everybody gets phaser right, and this one is a beautiful phaser. So you can hear that I'm moving both the width of the depth and where in the sweep it is, so I can get exactly the phaser sound I want. I've got got my stereo offset so I can create all kind of different stereo spatial tricks, and again a wet dry. Next effects is a lo-fi. It basically lets me do sample starving. Lets me do various distortion. Plus a filter, and again the filter cutoff and the resonance can be chosen and swept via the controllers. And last one is a tremolo, so I can have a stereo or mod tremolo. And they're also let me doing pitch mod, which lets me add a little bit of chorusing effect to that as well. I can do it both with sine, square for a very hard tremolo. Then I've got an EQ with a low gain, a high gain, a mid gain. I can set my crossover points for both the low and the high and do a wet dry. So really a powerful EQ. And one thing I've really noticed while programming this synth is that there is a lot of headroom. And so I can boost things a crazy amount and I'm not clipping the signal. That's a lot of gain to not clip. Same with mids. And again, I can set the crossover points. And then for side chaining, you can set it to BPM ducking so that it drops volume in rhythmically, like you hear in EDM or dance songs. You could do tap. You could do either mod 1 or mod 2 as the source for side chaining, so you could have a microphone that as you talk it gets quieter, or tracking against a kick drum or something like that. Very, very cool. Then you got your ratio, your threshold, attack time, release time, a final output level, and then a wet-dry mix, because I really like having a compressor that you can also blend some of the dry in. I always believe that you can hide compressor artifacts the best that way. And that's just the first effect. So now I'm going to go into the delay. I have it set at the first choice, which is just a basic monaural delay. I have it at 50-50 wet-dry. I'm not doing anything to the tone. The feedback's at 0. It should just be a single pulse. And I can add some feedback, and the feedback will go to infinite. Very musical delay. As far as times, I can go as low as 1 millisecond. So now we're definitely way down into the flange territory. And since time can be modulated, that means you could create your own flange or your own chorus if you didn't want to use the other two effects for flange or chorus. And then we can go as long as 3 seconds or 3,000 milliseconds. If you don't want to specify a particular time, you turn beat sync on, and now all of your delays are on units of the beat, from as fast as a 64th triplet all the way up to a dotted measure. Lots of choices there. And where that really comes important is when you get to the arpeggiator. Now you're locking your delays to your arpeggiation. And as I keep saying, all your LFOs can lock the clock, all your envelopes can lock the clock, your delays can lock the clock. It just makes for this very complex rhythmic ambience that is very hard to do if you can't lock the clock. So that was basically a flat delay in which the EQ of the delayed signal is identical to the incoming signal, kind of like your standard digital guitar delay pedals. But they give you two tone controls, a wet tone that affects the output of the echoes, and a feedback tone that affects the feedback loop of the echo. Each of them work in different ways, and between the two of them, you really can't get the exact kind of EQ that you're looking for. So the wet tone, when you have it in the middle, it's perfectly flat. As I go left, I'm sort of cutting the highs and emphasizing the lows. All the way to very, very dark. The other one is a low-pass filter that goes in between the output of the delay feeding back into itself, so that each repeat is getting darker. And between the two of them, you can effectively create the kind of EQ that you get from a tape-based echo or a bucket brigade-based echo or a digital delay echo. The next type is a stereo echo, which is identical except when you're feeding different things into left and right, and all of a sudden you'll hear that the echo is keeping the left and right true in the echo itself. The next one, my favorite, pan delay, or also known as ping pong delay. It's just a great effect. It is where your incoming note hits in the center, then left, then right, then left and right, and always at the same exact time. And it creates this amazing stereo ambience. And the best way, again, to show that is with the ribbon tripping patch, because that's what it's all about, is sweeping into a pan delay. Really like that delay. The next one is left, right, center delay. It's a fairly common delay in synthesizers. Like it says, it gives you a left echo, a right echo, then a center echo. It's great if you want to do the Lone Ranger theme. And it just creates a different kind of ambience. I tend to not use it as much as the pan or ping pong delay. That's one I'm always stuck on, but it's great to have it. Then you got a reverse delay. So the best way to hear that is that I'm sweeping upward, and you hear it sweeping downward, or I'll sweep downward. And if I do a wet dry, and that has all those choices as well. And of course, all of the delay types can be BPM synced. You turn that on. Where that really becomes magic is when you feed the arpeggiator into it. Now realize that everything that you're hearing right now is on a synth set to a INIT. One oscillator on saw, no filters, no envelopes, no LFOs, going into a ping pong delay with its tone set completely flat, 50-50 ratio, and I'm just going to be messing with the units of the beat just to show you how powerful it is. For the arpeggiator, I just turn it on, hit latch, that'll keep it holding. And I'll turn up the wet dry. And now I'm going to change the time ratio. And now to reverbs. I really like these reverbs. They're not throwaway reverbs. The first one is a hall, and here it is. And you have high damp and low damp and a tone. And the tone is the same as the delays. As I go left of center, I start getting more bass, less treble. As I go right of center, I get more treble, less bass. I'm going to turn the damping all the way off. I'll have the pre-delay set as low as possible and a nice long reverb time. Now, of course, that's way brighter than you normally use it, but I want to show you how the tone works. And now, a little more realistically with some high damp and some low damp. And the reverb time goes all the way up to 90 seconds. Which I won't sit for 90 seconds, but it'll go to freeze as well, which will hold your sound forever. And that's just hall. There are rooms and plates and cloud. And then finally, you've got post effects, and that's the same exact list as the pre effects. So again, chorus 3 types, flanger 3 types, rotary 3 types, phaser 3 types, and lo-fi and tremolo and EQ and compressor. So you can get really strategic about where in the chain you put the EQ and where in the chain you put a compressor or a lo-fi or a tremolo or any of your effects. Definitely hearing flange before a delay is very different from hearing a flange after a delay, things like that. Just extraordinary power and flexibility in really good sounding effects. That is the audio path. Now let's talk about some of the controllers. So the first one is your envelope. And I'm going to knit one more time just so I have a nice boring patch. And envelope 2 is typically dedicated to your amp, so you don't have to do any setup if you want. But like all these things, if you want to reassign them in the mod matrix to do anything you want, you can do that. But on page 1, I've got my standard attack all the way up to 36 seconds. I've got decay, which you won't hear till I turn the sustain down, but it's very snappy. Again, all the way up to 60 seconds. And then sustain, which can obviously go from silent. And release from 0 milliseconds. But then you've got delay and hold. And these are starting to show up a lot in modern synths, and I like them a lot. Delay basically is the amount of time from when you hit the key to before the envelope even starts. And that goes all the way up to 32 seconds. Why do you need those? Often if you have 2 different sounds happening and one happens at a delay after the other, it gives you that patong or a pluck or a bell or a snap kind of sound. All of those are just very, very useful. And the last one is hold. And that's basically in an ADSR, right after you get to your max, instead of immediately falling at your decay rate, you can hold for a short period of time. It was originally designed to emulate what happens when you're overloading the filter of an analog synth, where you go up to a certain volume level and then you don't come down right away because you're still saturated, so you haven't started falling. I like it because it lets a sound much more solid to just be at full volume for a few milliseconds before it starts falling. Usually about 20, 30 milliseconds is what I like. But I'll show you with a quick decay how that hold really makes a difference. So here's 104 milliseconds of decay time, but now I'm going to hold at max before I fall. Hear how much more solid it feels? while still letting your decay fall at the rate you want. Also, these can be beat synced so that the envelopes can trigger, and once you do that, all of your times are now in units of the beat. Sustain is still in level because it's not a time, but that means that you can set envelope shapes that change as you change the tempo of your arpeggiator or an external sequencer or an external clock. Very, very, very musical. And to take this thing way over the top, it lets you change on page 2, so you just hit this again. It lets you set the curve of your attack time, of your decay time, of your release time. And it goes between logarithmic to linear to exponential. The easiest way to do that is we're going to just make an attack time here, is to just watch the OLED and it'll kind of teach you. Again, that's why I say this machine teaches you synthesis. But look how as I go more logarithmic, I don't start as hard on the attack. It takes a little bit, then it goes up quickly. As I go to linear, it's a straight line, but then as I keep going, you'll see that it starts quickly, but then toward the end fades off. Each of those things are very, very dramatic and very, very useful and really helps you nail exactly what you're going for. And the fact that it lets you do that on your decay and your release, it's extraordinarily musical. Then you have a legato feature where it won't re-trigger until you lift up on the key. You've got a free run where the envelopes just run, and you've got envelope looping. Now lets you turn envelopes into LFOs. And if you turn the BPM sync on, that means you can have looping envelopes that are now acting as complex LFOs that are following your clock at any unit of the beat. So the music potential is crazy. I can't wait to hear what people do with this stuff. Those are your envelopes, and you have 5 of them. They are identical. You can use them any way that you want. Envelopes 1 and 2 are pre-assigned to filter and amp, but you don't have to use them that way. It's just that you have a dedicated envelope 1 amount for your filters, and you have a dedicated LFO 2 amount, and the envelope 2 is hardwired into the amp. But again, all of those kind of things are available anytime you hit one of these while you're in the mod matrix. So those are the envelopes. You got 5 of them. And now we'll do LFOs. And there are 5 LFOs, plus, as I mentioned, a 6th one just for mod wheel vibrato. And they all work the same way. I hit LFO 1, and in order for you to hear it, I'm going to assign it to something. So I'm going to go to my mod matrix. I'm going to assign LFO 1 to, I'll choose all oscillators and their pitch and the amount. So as I turn this up, you should hear LFO 1. And I could change. I'm going to go to a triangle wave. I'm going to go faster. And this has lots of choices. You can choose rate, and you could choose whether that's a hand-chosen rate or a BPM, and again, unit of the beat. And you can also change the triggering so that you can make it so that each note triggers its own LFO right at the start of the LFO. You can set it so that your first note triggers the LFO, but that LFO is the same for all the notes. Or you could turn it off, which means all of the LFOs are just free running, more like an analog synth. Like the envelope, you have a delay, so I can have LFO not happen right away. And where I really like to use that is if I have mod wheel doing LFO, I like that when you first play a note, it doesn't start. It's got a little solidity. And so you can set the delay time and a fade in time to be very musical. I could choose the phase of the LFO, showing whereabouts it starts. So I'll pick a sawtooth down, you can see. So I can start anywhere in that sawtooth as my starting point. Those can be free running. That's by changing the phase. I have control over level of the LFOs. And then LFO 1 is assigned to a knob that goes to filters, either 1 or 2. So I can change those in real time. Again, 5 LFOs. And there's a 6th one that I'll show you about when I get into voice mode. The next set of controllers are the ribbon and aftertouch. I'll start with ribbon. So I can have it in pitch bend mode. And I can also set it to just be in mod mode. So it doesn't do any pitch. But now in the modulation matrix, it's a source. And as you saw from my ribbon, trip, and patch, it could be assigned to filter, it could be assigned to volume, it could be assigned to a bunch of things simultaneously, each moving in different directions. Very, very, very powerful, musical. And it's also got a hold mode. Let me go ahead and assign it to filter, and I can show you how that works. So I'm going to have a filter, I'm going to turn it down. And now I'm going to assign ribbon to filter, cut off. Very, very smooth. No glitchiness, no weirdness. When I go to the ribbon, I can choose whether it's absolute. In other words, wherever I touch is an exact value every time. All the way down here is nothing, and all the way here is only adding to something. So no change. Or I can do absolute. This is 0. So I'll open the filter a little bit. And now you'll hear that I can both go down and up. And then there's ribbon relative, which means wherever you put your finger, that's the new 0. And that's a really great performance mode where you don't have to exactly put your finger in the right spot. Wherever you put your finger is the new 0, and just move your hand. That's the ribbon. And this one is just crazy. This one is theremin mode. And what they're basically doing is setting the ribbon to be an independent theremin, independent of the notes that you're holding down here. And again, I got a very boring INIT patch here. Maybe I'll add a little reverb. Maybe just a little delay, just so you can hear what I'm doing. That's fine. And now, so I can play a theremin. That's great for giving you that not locked to a keyboard kind of sound. So all three of those modes are great, either the pitch mode or the mod only or the theremin mode. And when you're in theremin mode, you can choose the key span. So right now I was at 4 octaves. Here's 2 octaves. 4 octaves. I'm going to turn off that filter assignment I have to it. As well as setting the span, you can octave shift. So this thing could do bass notes. Oh, listen to that. Beautiful. And then another thing it can do is hold. So if I turn hold on, so wherever I hit it, it stays there. Probably not as useful for theremin mode, but for mod mode, let's say I'll go back and do that filter thing again. So I'm going to assign filter to the ribbon here and do cutoff and make the filter dark again. But now, with this hold mode on, I can set the filter via the ribbon and leave it. So it's just very nice to have something as large and controllable as a ribbon that then when you let go, it stays right there until the next time you touch it. You can also lock this ribbon behavior globally. So if you have a certain way you like it, it's just nice to lock it to that. So that's the ribbon. We're going to cover glide, which is a little button right above the mod wheel and pitch wheel. Very convenient. You hit it, it lights up, it turns on. And I can go into the voice mode and choose what kind of glide I have, as well as glide time. So here's a nice long glide time. I can choose whether it's linear, where it goes at the same speed all the way across, or whether it's faster at the end or slower at the end. Either way, here's... or the other way. See, I took a little bit longer at the end there. I can have legato glide or not, so I can have no glide. Or this is also where I set my pitch bend depth. That'll go a full 2 octaves up and down. I talked about the 6th LFO, that's found here, so I can set my amount. I can set whether that vibrato locks to the clock and its rate. Also in the voice mode, I can change whether I have polyphonic notes, monophonic, low note priority, high note priority, last note priority. Then I have a unison mode. So on top of all those mutant things that can thicken up and wave shape and do everything else, when I'm in unison, I can also stack additional notes. Crazy fatness. Then on a real analog synth, all of the oscillators are just free running and you're turning them on whenever. So you really don't know when in a phase a wave's going to happen. On a lot of digital synths, the waves always start at a certain point because of the recordings of the waves. With this random phase turned on, basically what happens is every time you hit a note, you don't know where the phase of that oscillator will be, and it just creates a much more analog type quality. And every time you hit a chord, it'll sound slightly different. If you want to enhance that, they have this analog feature. And unlike some synthesizers where doing an analog feel means, well, let's just randomly detune it. And that kind of captures what an analog synth does. But to my ears, it just adds sour milk. What this does is it's changing the relationship of filters and other parameters, not so much pitch, but I'm going to close the filter somewhat, just so you can get a sense of it. And now I'm going back to that parameter and I'm going to just try different amounts of this analog feel. Here, every chord sounds a little different. I know it's a very subtle thing, but when it's done right, it's very, very powerful. Last thing on here is the stereo width. Basically, they're using different algorithms to take each new note, voice, and place it in a different part of the stereo field. So here's a rotate mode. And you're hearing it jumping around. There's an alternating mode where they're alternating. And there's a random where you never know where in the stereo pan it's going to be. The key thing is when you play chords now, you get this amazing stereo field. Here's monaural. Here's stereo all the way. And remember, you're still able to stereo pan all 3 oscillators plus noise plus ring modulator, and then randomly stereo pan each of the voices of those. Now, the arpeggiator. It's, like I said before, it's very, very musical. You can just try any of the presets on here because every preset has an arpeggiation made for it, and all you do is turn it on, you just press on. And you can tap tempo it, or you can turn the knob. They both work all the time. You also have control over your gate time. In other words, for each note, how long does the note stay on before it lets go? Or you can get a little blip. I'm going to increase the attack time just a little bit here. And if you don't want to hold that, you can hit the latch button. And it's an intelligent latch in that every time you let go of all the keys, the next time you hold something down, it gets rid of the old latch stuff and latches the new notes. So again, very, very musical. So I can just hit something. All right, so now I'm going to show you some of the different modes. There's up, down, up, down, up and down. And the difference between those are, does it repeat the end notes, which is very, very cool. You can do order. So now it will play the arpeggiation in the order that you play them, which is almost a sequencer. Or you can do random. Or you can do chord, and now it's going to play all the notes you're holding as chords. And then they have another one called phrase, which lets you add a phrase to your arpeggiation. More to learn about how phrase works. Then you have octaves. So as I just showed you with one octave, here's 2 octaves. And it's cool to note that the polyphonic aftertouch works in the arpeggiator, so you can highlight different notes in the arpeggiation. Then you have division, in other words, clock. So it's basically going to change the ratio of time over your tap tempo. So here we go. You can do triplets on all of those. And you can swing them. Then you have a thing called ratchet, where individual steps can have multiple subdivisions within that step. And that's interactive with this chance knob that determines how often the ratcheting happens. And so you can have this random ratcheting, which is very, very, very musical. And that with random on your arpeggiation type, it just means your stuff doesn't get as boring as quickly. And speaking of random, there's a randomizer that will just randomly generate a patch or randomize certain parameter sections. I just wrote that. It's a really good randomizer. So last thing on this is the chord, and that is you can play a chord, and now, all right. I haven't talked a lot about the control voltage stuff, but I'll just show you really quickly the pages that are related to that. You have control voltage range, both in octaves or hertz, your reference note, your control voltage offset, the control voltage source, the gate type, whether it's a V trig or an S trig, and the amount of voltage for the gate. And now finally moving over to the desktop unit. And like I said, it is identical engine-wise to the full-size unit. There are just some controls that are missing. Obviously, there's no ribbon, there's no keyboard. It has just the single headphone jack on the back. And really the only other change is that you have 4 of the 8 arpeggiator knobs. You can still get to all of those parameters, the tempo, ratchet, chance, and gate. You just have to go in one level. And on the filter controls, where you have 5 knobs for the filter, including LFO1 and envelope modulation, this just has cutoff, resonance, and drive and morph, but you can still switch between the filters. Other than that, it's identical, which is very, very cool and very, very powerful, even the CV gates and everything else like that. The pads are both sensitive to pressure and velocity, and aftertouch is polyphonic aftertouch. On the pads, they can be various things, but if you're using them as notes, you just use the shift button, and all of a sudden, all of the orange writing, which you can now see because all of the buttons darken, it lets you change octaves very quickly for your pads, and it lets you change your different pad modes, chromatic, fretboard, octave, and it lets you change the key. So when you hit the key, you now see a keyboard with your white keys and the black keys, and you can make any of those be the new key, and the yellow lights are your root. And obviously I'm in chromatic mode now, but again, hold the shift key and I'll go into Mixolydian. So if I want to choose a key, I just hold the shift and I'll be in the key of D now. So your yellow keys are now D. I can change key to F, and now I'm in the key of F. The buttons can be chromatic, they can be like a fretboard, they can be by octaves. The key thing is you can choose different scale types. It shows you which buttons to press if you want to be in the scale that you just chose, but all of your chromatic choices are still there. So, for example, if I want to do whole tone, if I stay only on these blue ones, I'm only doing whole note steps. If I do blues, shift, blues, and only do the blue notes, you can choose from Dorian, Phrygian, Lydian, Mixolydian, minor, Locrian, harmonic minor, melodic minor, chromatic, major, major pentatonic, minor pentatonic, blues, bebop, whole tone, and diminished whole, which is the half whole scale. I love that scale. There's very cool things on that. You can also assign those to do other things. Those send out via MIDI, a lot of MIDI power on both, and very important, you can set this up so that you use a module to make this a 16-voice Hydrasynth for less than buying 2 Hydrasynth keyboards. And finally, something that's common to both of them are the macros. And I saved it for last because it's just so crazy powerful. A macro is basically a knob. When you're on the very front page, you hit the home button and you're at the top. And you can simply go to macro assign, and you'll see that you have 8 of these knobs and 8 of these buttons, and you can hand name them so they can be very descriptive about what they do. So for example, on the very first patch, the very first thing is called wave. Now, obviously, I could go into the wave parameter and sweep those individually, but someone has kindly put that on the front page. So, same with noise. Same with chorus. High frequency spin. Thicken. FM. Delay amount. reverb amount. There's also buttons. The buttons can also have values for all of the things you set that to be if you just want a quick specific reverb amount, specific delay amount, a specific chorus amount. You're back to having whatever the knobs are set. So great use of these knobs when you're not editing. There's also a librarian that allows you to connect via USB or MIDI, and then you can move patches around, rename things, do your basic librarian stuff. But it's in beta right now. There will be an editor in the future. I can just tell you that it's gorgeous and easy to use. But really, do you need an editor? This thing is so easy to edit. The only time I might ever use the editor is for like naming all my macros or something like that. But the rest of it, it's so convenient to do from either of these keyboards. If you have any further questions about either the Hydrasynth keyboard or desktop, please contact your Sweetwater sales engineer. Don't forget that I've got another video of just sounds of these things. And just in general, if you like these kind of videos, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. My name is Daniel Fisher. Thank you very much for watching.